London, 1857. The gossip sheets had been merciless. Alexander Irving, the Duke of Westmoreland, scanned the latest edition of the London Gazette with mounting disgust, his jaw clenched so tightly he could feel a headache building behind his temples. There, in black and white, was yet another scathing paragraph suggesting the frozen Duke should relinquish his estates to his cousin, as 5 years of widowerhood had produced no heir and certain proclivities made it unlikely one would ever materialize. Alexander slammed the paper down upon his mahogany desk, the expensive crystal decanter nearby trembling with the force. 5 years since Elizabeth's death, and still they circled like vultures. His marriage had been brief, loveless, and strategic, exactly as aristocratic unions should be. Her death in childbirth, along with their stillborn son, had only reinforced what he'd learned in his youth. Emotional attachments were a weakness that inevitably led to pain. Your Grace, his secretary, Mr. Powell, appeared at the study door. Lord Haverford has arrived. Send him in, Alexander replied, his voice devoid of warmth. Lord Haverford, Alexander's oldest acquaintance from Eton, entered with his usual lack of ceremony, helping himself to brandy before settling into a leather chair. I trust you've seen today's delightful reading material, Haverford said, gesturing toward the discarded newspaper. A remarkable work of fiction, Alexander replied coldly. Except for the part about needing an heir. Haverford swirled his brandy. Your cousin Reginald was at White's last night, making thinly veiled remarks about his readiness to assume your responsibilities. Alexander's expression hardened. Reginald is a fool and a gambler who would run my estates into the ground within a year. Then you know what must be done. You need a wife. Not for love, God forbid you should trouble yourself with that inconvenience, but for appearances. An heir. Silence the whispers. Secure your legacy. I have no intention of binding myself to another woman. Then at least find a temporary solution. A fiancé. Someone to quiet the rumors while you determine how to manage Reginald. Haverford leaned forward. Your father didn't spend his life building the dukedom just for you to let it slip through your fingers because you refused to play society's game. The mention of his father struck a nerve. Alexander had spent his life trying to become the man his father had demanded he be: logical, unsentimental, strategic. Emotions were messy liabilities that clouded judgment. I suppose you have a candidate in mind? Alexander asked, knowing his friend too well. As a matter of fact. Haverford grinned. Lord Ravenwood's annual midsummer ball is in a fortnight. Every eligible young lady in London will be present. Alexander stared into the amber depths of his brandy. An engagement, the temporary one, might indeed quiet the gossip, prevent Reginald's machinations, and maintain his control of the dukedom. He need not even go through with a wedding if a better solution presented itself. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Very well, he said finally. I shall make an appearance. Sophia Russell had never known such humiliation. Standing in Lady Millbrook's lavish drawing-room, she clutched the letter in her trembling hands as her cousin Isabella's words of sympathy washed over her. Truly, Sophia, Mr. Thornfield is unworthy of your affections if he could break your engagement in such a callous manner. Isabella placed a comforting hand on Sophia's arm. To jilt you for an American heiress. An heiress with £50,000, Sophia corrected, her voice hollow. I cannot blame him for choosing financial security over affection. But she did blame him, and herself. She had believed Thomas Thornfield when he'd spoken of love, of building a future together despite her modest means. The daughter of a country vicar, Sophia had been invited to London for her first season by her aunt and uncle, who had hoped to see her advantageously matched. Instead, she now faced returning to Derbyshire in disgrace, her reputation tainted by a broken engagement. "Nonsense," Isabella declared. "You are the most kind-hearted, gentle soul I know. Any man would be fortunate to have you." Sophia smiled weakly. At 23, she was already considered dangerously close to spinsterhood. This failed engagement would only make matters worse. But what truly pained her wasn't the loss of Thomas himself. In hindsight, she recognized how little she truly knew him, but the realization that her romantic notions had been foolish. In their world, marriage was a business transaction, not the love match she had naively dreamed of since childhood. "I should like to return home," Sophia murmured. "Father has been unwell, and clearly my season is over." "You'll do no such thing," Isabella insisted. "You'll attend Lord Ravenwood's ball with us next week and show London society that Sophia Russell is undiminished by Mr. Thornfield's poor judgment." Before Sophia could protest, her young cousin continued, "Besides, you've already purchased that lovely blue gown. It would be a terrible waste not to wear it at least once." Sophia hesitated. The thought of facing society's whispers and pitying glances was excruciating. Yet the prospect of slinking back to Derbyshire in defeat seemed equally unbearable. "Perhaps you're right," she conceded. "One last evening before I return home. But I hold no illusions about my prospects now." Isabella squeezed her hand. "Sometimes, dear cousin, life's greatest blessings come when we least expect them." Sophia nodded politely, but in her heart, she had learned her lesson. She would guard her heart more carefully in the future, for in their world, love was a luxury few could truly afford. Lord Ravenwood's ballroom glittered with candles reflected in gilt mirrors and the jewels of London's elite. Alexander entered with practiced indifference, acknowledging acquaintances with brief nods while scanning the room for potential candidates for his charade. The criteria were simple: a woman of good family but modest means, someone who would understand and accept a marriage of convenience, preferably someone sensible who would not develop inconvenient feelings. Westmoreland, Lord Ravenwood greeted him with surprise. "I don't believe you've graced us with your presence since before your loss." "Indeed," Alexander replied coldly, disliking the reference to Elizabeth. "Well, you've chosen an excellent evening to return. We have quite a collection of eligible young ladies present." Lord Ravenwood's eyes twinkled with matchmaking zeal. "My wife would be delighted to make introductions." "That won't be necessary," Alexander replied, but Ravenwood had already summoned his wife, who approached with evident delight. "Your Grace! What a pleasure to see you among us again. There are several young ladies I'm certain would be honored to make your acquaintance." Alexander resigned himself to enduring the evening's pageantry. Over the next hour, he was introduced to no fewer than 8 young women, each more vapid and fortune-hunting than the last. Their forced laughter and transparent attempts at flattery only reinforced his decision to keep the impending engagement strictly businesslike. He was contemplating his escape when a commotion near the refreshment table caught his attention. A young woman in a modest but becoming blue gown had rushed to the aid of an elderly gentleman who had stumbled. While others merely stared, she had moved without hesitation, helping the man to a chair and fetching him water. Her actions were performed with such natural grace and genuine concern that Alexander found himself watching with unexpected interest. "Who is that lady?" he asked Lady Millbrook, who happened to be nearby. "Miss Sophia Russell," Lady Millbrook replied. "My niece. She's staying with us for the season, though I fear it hasn't gone as hoped. Recently jilted, poor dear, by a man who chose fortune over affection. She bears it with remarkable dignity." Alexander continued to observe Miss Russell as she ensured the elderly gentleman was comfortable before quietly returning to her position along the wall. Unlike the other young ladies who preened and positioned themselves prominently, she seemed content to remain unnoticed, her expression thoughtful rather than calculating. "Would you care for an introduction?" Lady Millbrook offered, clearly surprised by his interest. "I am rarely accused of kindness," he replied dryly. "Then perhaps you've been misjudged," she said, meeting his gaze with surprising directness before the dance separated them. When they came together again, Alexander found himself curious about this woman who seemed so different from others of her station. "I understand you're visiting from the country." "Yes, from Derbyshire. My father is the vicar at Thornfield parish." "And do you prefer London society to country life?" She considered this carefully. "Each has its merits. London offers culture and diversion, but I find more authenticity in country interactions." "Authenticity is rare in any society," Alexander remarked. "Perhaps because we're all afraid of being truly known," she replied, then immediately looked chagrined. "Forgive me, that was impertinent." On the contrary, Alexander said, it was refreshingly honest. As the dance continued, Alexander found himself engaged in the most genuine conversation he'd had in years. Miss Russell spoke intelligently about books, showed witty insight into society's foibles, and displayed a warmth toward others that contrasted sharply with his own careful detachment. Most surprising was her ability to make him think, not merely to respond with practiced pleasantries, but to consider his actual opinions. When the music ended, Alexander was reluctant to relinquish her company. "Would you care to promenade with me, Miss Russell? The terrace is said to be quite pleasant." Her hesitation was visible. "Your Grace, while I'm honored by your attention, I'm conscious that it may create expectations. I should be transparent, I am returning to Derbyshire next week and have no fortune to recommend me." Her frankness only increased his interest. "I'm merely suggesting a walk, Miss Russell, not a proposal." The gentle rebuke made her smile. "Then I would be pleased to see the terrace." On the lamplit terrace, they spoke of her life in Derbyshire, her father's parish work, and her own efforts teaching at the village school. Alexander found himself increasingly intrigued by her natural compassion, so at odds with his own carefully constructed walls. "You must think me terribly provincial," she said after describing her work with the village children. "I think you purposeful," he corrected. "Many ladies of society drift through life without any true occupation." "And what occupies the Duke of Westmoreland?" she asked. "Beyond the obvious responsibilities of your station?" The question caught him off guard. No one had inquired about his personal interests in years. "I breed horses," he admitted. "And I've been working to improve agricultural methods on my estates." "Both worthy endeavors," she said with genuine interest. "My father always says that true nobility lies in how one uses their advantages to benefit others." Alexander studied her in the soft lamplight. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is," she said, a shadow crossing her face. "Though his health has been declining. It's partly why I must return home." "And not because of your recent disappointment?" He immediately regretted the question, but she answered with remarkable composure. "Mr. Thornfield's decision was a blessing in disguise. I realize now we would have been ill-suited." She looked out over the garden. He wanted a wife who would enhance his social position. "I want a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose." Her words struck Alexander with unexpected force. Elizabeth had been chosen for her impeccable bloodline and substantial dowry, their marriage a coldly practical arrangement. He had never considered marriage as a partnership of equals. "A rare perspective," he said finally. She turned to face him, her expression serene in the moonlight. "Perhaps. But I would rather remain unmarried than enter a union without genuine regard." Alexander found himself at a crossroads. Miss Russell represented everything he needed in his charade, a respectable lady of good family but modest means who would understand the practical nature of an aristocratic marriage. Yet her evident integrity made him hesitate to entangle her in his scheme. Before he could resolve this dilemma, they were interrupted by Lady Millbrook, who appeared with barely concealed excitement. "Sophia, dear, I've been looking everywhere for you. Lord and Lady Pembroke wished to thank you personally for your assistance earlier." "Of course, Aunt." Sophia curtsied to Alexander. "Thank you for a most pleasant conversation, Your Grace." As she departed, Alexander remained on the terrace, unsettled by the encounter. For the first time in years, he had glimpsed the possibility of genuine connection with another person. It was precisely what he had spent years avoiding. Yet as he watched Sophia Russell graciously accepting Lord Pembroke's thanks, Alexander made his decision. If he must enter into an engagement of convenience, he could think of no better candidate than Miss Russell. Her circumstances made her likely to accept his proposition, while her character suggested she would honor whatever agreement they reached. The fact that he had actually enjoyed her company was merely a convenient coincidence. 3 days after Lord Ravenwood's ball, Sophia sat in her aunt's drawing-room, carefully mending a tear in Isabella's evening gloves. Her thoughts kept drifting to her unexpected encounter with the Duke of Westmoreland. Society called him the Frozen Duke for his remote demeanor and apparent indifference to feminine charms, yet she had glimpsed something else beneath his reserve: intelligence, dry wit, and perhaps a profound loneliness he himself did not recognize. "Miss Russell," the butler announced from the doorway, interrupting her reverie, "His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland, is calling." Sophia pricked her finger in surprise, a drop of blood staining the white glove. Hastily setting aside her sewing, she smoothed her simple morning dress, acutely aware of its modesty compared to the finery he must be accustomed to. "Show him in, Collins," her aunt said, straightening with evident delight. "And bring tea immediately." The Duke entered with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to deference, yet his gaze sought Sophia's immediately. She curtsied, noting the tension in his posture despite his outward composure. "Your Grace," Lady Millbrook gushed, "what an unexpected pleasure. I hope you found the ball agreeable." "Indeed," he replied politely, though his attention remained on Sophia. "Lady Millbrook, might I request a few moments of private conversation with Miss Russell?" Her aunt's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Of course. Isabella and I were just about to inspect the conservatory, weren't we, dear?" Isabella, who had been doing no such thing, allowed herself to be hurried from the room, casting a wide-eyed glance at Sophia as they departed. When the door closed, an awkward silence fell. The Duke remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "Please, be seated, Your Grace," Sophia offered, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Thank you." He sat with military precision. "Miss Russell, I'll come directly to the point. I find myself in need of a wife, and I believe you may be suitable." Sophia's breath caught. Of all the things she had imagined he might say, this had not been among them. I don't understand," she managed. His expression remained impassive. "It's a simple proposition. I require a duchess for appearances and to secure my lineage. You need security and position. I believe we could arrange terms advantageous to both parties." Sophia stared at him, struggling to comprehend. "You're proposing a marriage of convenience." "Precisely." He leaned forward slightly. "I admire your intelligence and composure, Miss Russell. You understand the practical realities of our world. I would provide generously for you and your family, including the best medical care for your father. In return, you would fulfill the social obligations of a duchess and, in time, provide an heir." Sophia felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. After the humiliation with Thomas, she had resigned herself to spinsterhood, perhaps becoming a governess to support herself after her father's passing. The Duke's offer represented security, status, wealth, everything a woman in her position should desire. And yet something within her rebelled. "Your Grace," she said finally, turning to face him, "I appreciate your candor. But I must decline." Now he did look surprised. "May I ask why?" "I assure you, the settlement would be generous. It's not a matter of financial terms." Sophia summoned her courage. "I cannot enter a marriage devoid of affection, however advantageous it might appear. Perhaps it's foolish of me, but I believe marriage should be more than a business arrangement." "An idealistic notion," he said, his tone cooling. "One that reality rarely accommodates." "Perhaps," Sophia acknowledged. "But it's one I cannot abandon, even for the honor you offer." The Duke stood, his expression once again impassive. "I see. Then I apologize for taking up your time, Miss Russell." "There's no need for apology. I'm truly flattered by your consideration." He moved toward the door, then paused. "May I ask one question?" "Of course." "If you had accepted, would you have been happy?" "Truly?" The unexpected vulnerability in his question caught her off guard. "I would have had security, position, and purpose," she answered carefully. "But happiness?" "I believe that requires a meeting of hearts as well as minds." Something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of what might have been regret. "Good day, Miss Russell." After he departed, Sophia sank into her chair, trembling with the magnitude of what she had just refused. Her aunt would think her mad. Perhaps she was. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the Duke's cold proposal lay a man who had forgotten how to connect with others, or perhaps had never learned. She had glimpsed something in him that night on the terrace, a capacity for genuine interest, even warmth. That was what made his bloodless proposal so disappointing. She had imagined, foolishly perhaps, that he might have felt the same unexpected connection she had. Clearly, she had been mistaken. Alexander stalked through his London townhouse, irritation sharpening his movements. The servants wisely kept their distance as he entered his study and poured a generous measure of brandy. Refused. He had been refused by a penniless country vicar's daughter. The sheer audacity of it should have angered him, yet what he felt was something more complex, a disconcerting blend of admiration and regret. Miss Russell had looked at the wealth, title, and security he offered and deemed it insufficient because it lacked something as ephemeral as affection. It was precisely the sort of romantic nonsense he had expected her to be above. Yet her words had struck an uncomfortable chord. A meeting of hearts as well as minds. As if such a thing were possible in their world of calculated alliances and strategic marriages. His own parents had embodied the aristocratic ideal, a union of compatible bloodlines and fortunes, conducted with perfect propriety and minimal personal interaction. His father had maintained his mistresses discreetly, his mother had devoted herself to social obligations and charity work. They had produced an heir and a spare with clinical efficiency. When his younger brother Edward had died of scarlet fever at 7, Alexander had learned his first lesson about emotional attachment. His mother's genuine grief had been deemed unseemly, requiring a prolonged stay in the country to recover her nerves. His father had simply commissioned a memorial and continued with his affairs. Emotions are a weakness, his father had told him. Rule your heart with your head, or others will use your sentiments against you. It was a philosophy Alexander had embraced fully, especially after Elizabeth's death had demonstrated the painful consequences of allowing oneself even the slightest emotional investment. So why did Miss Russell's rejection trouble him? He had approached her with a logical proposition that would benefit them both. Her refusal on sentimental grounds merely confirmed that he had misjudged her practical nature. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called sharply. Haverford appeared, eyeing the brandy. A bit early for that, isn't it? Even for you. What do you want? Alexander demanded, in no mood for his friend's needling. I heard the most fascinating rumor at White's. Haverford settled into a chair uninvited. Apparently, you called upon a Miss Russell yesterday, a vicar's daughter with no fortune to speak of, and left looking like thunder. Care to explain? Alexander scowled. London's gossips work with remarkable efficiency. When the frozen duke suddenly shows interest in a woman, people notice. Haverford studied him. Was she unsuitable? On the contrary. She was eminently suitable but declined my offer. Haverford nearly choked on his drink. She refused you? A duke? For God's sake, why? A lack of affection. Alexander pronounced the word with distaste. To his surprise, Haverford laughed. Well, you can hardly blame her. You probably proposed as though offering a business contract. Marriage is a contract. Not to most women. Haverford leaned forward. Did it occur to you to court her first? Perhaps demonstrate some interest beyond her utility as a broodmare. Alexander's jaw tightened. I was direct and honest about my expectations. And therein lies your problem. Haverford sighed. You may not believe in romance, but most women do, especially respectable vicars' daughters. If you want her to accept, you'll need to at least pretend some attachment. I have no intention of engaging in such deception. Then find another candidate. Lady Hamilton's daughter is eager for a title, regardless of the man attached to it. Alexander frowned. The thought of Miss Hamilton's calculating smile and transparent ambition was suddenly distasteful compared to Sophia Russell's forthright integrity. Perhaps, he said slowly, a different approach might be warranted. Haverford raised an eyebrow. You actually care about this particular woman's acceptance? Now that is interesting. I merely recognize her suitability, Alexander said stiffly. Her intelligence and discretion would make her an appropriate duchess. Of course, Haverford replied with obvious skepticism. Nothing to do with the fact that she's the first woman in years who's engaged your attention beyond mere duty. Alexander glared at him. Your imagination exceeds your sense. Perhaps. Haverford rose to leave. But if you genuinely wish to secure Miss Russell's acceptance, you might consider appealing to her heart rather than her practical considerations. Women appreciate effort, especially when it costs a man his pride. After his friend departed, Alexander paced the study, reluctant to admit Haverford might be right. The thought of engaging in romantic pretense was distasteful, yet Miss Russell's refusal had left him with limited options. He paused at the window, gazing out at the manicured garden where Elizabeth had once supervised the planting of roses she never lived to see bloom. He had chosen her for her bloodline, her connections, her substantial dowry, all the practical considerations a duke should prioritize. Their brief marriage had been cordial but cold, both of them performing their duties with appropriate detachment. What would it be like, he wondered suddenly, to marry a woman who spoke her mind? Who valued genuine connection over appearance? Who might look at him and see not just the Duke of Westmoreland, but Alexander Irving, the man? The thought was unsettling. Yet as he considered his alternatives, marriage to a fortune hunter like Miss Hamilton, or watching his cousin Reginald dismantle his legacy, Alexander found himself contemplating a most unexpected course of action. Perhaps, just this once, he would need to set aside his principles and engage in a bit of strategic courtship. Sophia had expected to be departing London within days of refusing the Duke's proposal. Instead, a series of unexpected events had conspired to extend her stay. First came a letter from her father, insisting he was much improved and that she should not curtail her season on his account. Then Lady Millbrook discovered that their carriage required repairs that would take at least a fortnight to complete. Yet the following day brought a volume of poetry by Wordsworth, with passages about the Derbyshire countryside marked with subtle pencil lines. The day after that, a letter arrived requesting her presence at a small musical gathering at his townhouse, hosted by his aunt, Lady Harrington. "You must accept," Isabella insisted when Sophia hesitated. "The Duke is clearly making an effort to court you properly this time." "That's precisely what concerns me," Sophia replied. "His original proposal was at least honest in its mercenary nature. This sudden romantic overture feels calculated." "Or perhaps he realized his mistake," her cousin suggested. "Maybe he genuinely wishes to know you better." Sophia sighed, fingering the elegant invitation. "Or perhaps he simply wants to ensure I understand the magnitude of what I'm refusing." Despite her misgivings, Sophia found herself agreeing to attend. Curiosity, if nothing else, compelled her to understand the Duke's changed approach. Lady Harrington's musical evening proved to be an intimate gathering of barely 20 guests, far from the grand affairs the Duke usually attended. Sophia entered with trepidation, acutely aware of curious glances from the assembled aristocracy. "Miss Russell," the Duke greeted her, appearing at her side with unexpected promptness. "I'm pleased you could attend." Sophia curtsied. "Thank you for the invitation, Your Grace. And for the thoughtful gifts. Though I confess I'm somewhat puzzled by them." Something that might have been embarrassment flickered across his face. "I realized my previous approach was lacking in certain considerations that might be important to you. Such as genuine acquaintance before a proposal of marriage," Sophia suggested, unable to keep a hint of dryness from her tone. To her surprise, a faint smile touched his lips. "Precisely. Lady Harrington has arranged for an excellent soprano this evening. May I escort you to your seat?" Throughout the performance, Sophia was acutely conscious of the Duke beside her, his profile stern in the candlelight. Occasionally, he would glance at her when a particularly beautiful passage was performed, as if gauging her reaction. It was disconcerting to be the object of such focused attention from a man renowned for his indifference. During the interval, he guided her to a small side room where refreshments were being served, positioning them slightly apart from the other guests. "You appreciate music, Miss Russell?" he inquired. "Very much," she replied. "Though our country performances can't compare to this. Yet they may have other virtues, sincerity, perhaps, over technical perfection." Sophia studied him with surprise. "That's true. Our village performances lack polish but never heart." "I believe you value authenticity in all things," he said quietly. "I try to," she acknowledged. "Though society often seems to prefer beautiful illusions." "And is that how you view my recent attentions?" "As an illusion." The directness of his question startled her. I'm not certain what to make of them, Your Grace. Your initial proposal made your practical requirements quite clear. These subsequent gestures seem at odds with your established character." He was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps you've caused me to reconsider certain assumptions. About marriage. About possibilities." His gaze was steady. "Would you permit me to call on you tomorrow? There's an exhibition at the Royal Academy I thought might interest you." Sophia hesitated, torn between wariness and a reluctant curiosity about this altered version of the Duke. That would be acceptable. The following day began a courtship unlike any Sophia could have imagined. Over the course of a week, the Duke escorted her to the art exhibition, a botanical garden, and a lecture on advancements in education for the poor. He arranged a private tour of the British Museum when he learned of her interest in history, and sent a rare edition of her father's favourite theological text for her to forward to Derbyshire. Most surprising was his attentiveness during their conversations. He listened when she spoke of her teaching work, offered thoughtful responses to her opinions, and occasionally revealed glimpses of his own thoughts on estate management, agricultural improvements, and his concerns for the families dependent on his lands. Yet for all his evident effort, Sophia sensed a careful restraint in his manner, as though he were following a script for proper courtship rather than acting from genuine feeling. He never touched her beyond the necessary formalities, maintained impeccable propriety at all times, and spoke not a word of affection or admiration, only of shared interests and compatible views. It was, Sophia realized with a mixture of disappointment and respect, an honorable attempt to offer her the appearance of romance while remaining true to his pragmatic nature. The culmination came on a clear spring afternoon when he invited her to Hyde Park. As they walked along the fashionable pathways, conspicuously observed by society's elite, Sophia decided to address the situation directly. "Your Grace," she began carefully, "I appreciate the attention you've shown me this past week. Your efforts have been most thorough." He glanced at her, something like wariness in his expression. "You make it sound like a military campaign, Miss Russell." "Isn't it?" she asked gently. "A strategic effort to secure my acceptance by demonstrating your willingness to accommodate my romantic sensibilities." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. For a moment, genuine emotion showed in his eyes, frustration, uncertainty, and perhaps a hint of admiration. "You are disconcertingly perceptive," he said at last. "I merely observe what's before me," Sophia replied. "You've been attentive and considerate, but never once have you spoken of any personal feeling. You're offering the form of courtship without its substance." His jaw tightened. "I promised myself long ago that I would never engage in pretty lies about love and devotion. I respect you too much for such deception." The admission touched her unexpectedly. "Then I thank you for your honesty, if not for your underlying assumption that affection must always be a lie. Experience has taught me that emotions are unreliable at best, destructive at worst," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I can offer you position, security, respect, and partnership. I cannot offer what I do not possess." Sophia felt a profound sadness wash over her. What had happened to this man to convince him so thoroughly that love was either a pretense or a weakness? "I believe you're wrong," she said quietly. "I believe you are capable of genuine feeling, but you've denied it for so long you no longer recognize it." His expression hardened. "You know nothing of me or my life, Miss Russell." "That's precisely my point, Your Grace." She met his gaze steadily. "You offer marriage, the most intimate of unions, while keeping yourself entirely unknown. How can I accept such an arrangement when you reveal nothing of the man behind the title?" For a moment, something raw and unguarded flashed across his features. Then, with visible effort, he composed himself. "What would you have me reveal?" "That my father taught me from childhood that emotion was weakness. That my mother was banished to the country for grieving too openly for my brother. That my wife died bringing my stillborn son into the world, leaving me with nothing but the knowledge that attachment brings only pain." The words seemed torn from him, hanging in the air between them. Sophia stood motionless, struck by the depth of pain beneath his controlled exterior. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Truly." He looked away, visibly regathering his composure. "It was long ago. I've built my life on reason and duty since then. It's sufficient." "Is it?" she asked gently. The Duke didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "It has been, until recently." "What changed?" His eyes met hers, and for once, His gaze was unguarded. I met a woman who refused to accept sufficiency when she believed more was possible. Sophia's heart quickened at the unexpected admission. And do you now believe more is possible, Your Grace? I don't know. And if, after 3 months, we find ourselves incompatible, she asked. Then you may cry off with a generous settlement to secure your future and your father's care. I will accept full responsibility for the broken engagement, ensuring your reputation remains intact. It was a fair offer, perhaps even a generous one. Yet Sophia still hesitated. I need your answer, Sophia, he said, using her given name for the first time. Not based on romantic fantasies or practical considerations, but on your own judgment of what might be possible between us. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Sophia saw not just the Duke of Westmoreland, but Alexander Irving, a man who had been taught to deny his own heart, who believed himself incapable of the very connection he was now cautiously offering to explore. Yes, she said finally. I accept your compromise. Something like relief crossed his features, followed by a determination that was almost fierce. Then I shall call on your uncle tomorrow to make the formal arrangements. As they continued their promenade, now engaged in the eyes of society if not fully in their hearts, Sophia wondered if she had made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward something unexpected and precious. Only time would tell. News of the engagement between the Duke of Westmoreland and Miss Sophia Russell spread through London like wildfire. Society gossip speculated endlessly about how a penniless vicar's daughter had captured the frozen duke, with theories ranging from hidden fortunes to scandalous entrapment. Alexander found himself oddly unmoved by the gossip. His announcement had achieved its primary purpose, silencing questions about his inheritance and neutralizing his cousin Reginald's machinations. Beyond that, he was more concerned with navigating the unexpected territory of his arrangement with Sophia. Their engagement necessitated regular meetings, both public and private. Alexander arranged for Sophia to visit Westmoreland House in London, accompanied by her aunt, to begin learning about the responsibilities that would come with her position as Duchess. He watched with growing respect as she absorbed information about the household management, the charitable foundations, and the complex social obligations with intelligent focus. Your housekeeper seems concerned by my lack of experience, Sophia remarked one afternoon as they walked through the picture gallery. Mrs. Winters is concerned about everything, Alexander replied. It's her natural state. She's not wrong. I know nothing of managing a household of this magnitude. You'll learn. He studied her profile as she examined a family portrait. You're intelligent and adaptable. Those qualities matter more than experience. She glanced at him with surprise. That's unexpectedly encouraging of you. I merely state facts as I observe them, he said, uncomfortable with her warm response to what had been a simple observation. Yet he found himself increasingly making such observations, noting her quick understanding of estate accounts, her diplomatic handling of his more snobbish relatives, her genuine interest in the welfare of his household staff. Each demonstration of her capabilities reinforced his conviction that he had chosen well, regardless of the unusual terms of their engagement. More unsettling were the moments when their conversation strayed beyond practical matters. During an evening at the opera, she had asked about his childhood, and he had found himself describing summers at Westmoreland Court before his brother's death, memories he had buried decades ago. On another occasion, while reviewing plans for improvements to a tenant farm, her insightful questions had led to a lengthy discussion about agricultural innovations, during which he'd forgotten himself enough to speak with genuine passion about his hopes for increasing yield without exhausting the land. You truly care about your estates, she had remarked, watching him with those perceptive eyes. Not just as properties, but as communities. It's my responsibility, he had replied stiffly. It's more than that, she had countered gently. It's something you believe in. Such moments left him feeling strangely exposed, as though she were gradually dismantling the carefully constructed walls around his private self. It was disconcerting, yet he could not bring himself to reinforce those boundaries. As May turned to June, London prepared for the move to country estates. Alexander invited Sophia and her relatives to Westmoreland Court for a fortnight, ostensibly to acquaint her with what would become her primary residence after their wedding. "It's magnificent," Sophia breathed as their carriage approached the sprawling Palladian mansion set amid meticulously landscaped grounds. "I've never seen anything like it." Alexander studied her expression, searching for signs of calculation or triumphant ambition. He found only genuine appreciation and perhaps a touch of apprehension. "It's been in my family for 6 generations," he said. "My great-grandfather rebuilt it after a fire destroyed the original Tudor structure. It must have such history within its walls," she mused. "So many lives and stories. Primarily tales of advantageous marriages and strategic alliances," he remarked dryly. She glanced at him with that disconcerting perceptiveness. "Is that all you see when you look at your ancestral home? Bloodless calculations?" The question unsettled him more than it should have. "It's what built this estate and preserved it through war, plague, and political upheaval." "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But surely there must have been joy here too. Children's laughter, celebrations, moments of genuine connection." Alexander looked away, unwilling to admit that her words had conjured a memory of racing his brother through the great hall, their mother's admonishments giving way to reluctant laughter as they slid across the polished marble in their stocking feet. "The court has been well maintained," he said instead. "You'll find everything in proper order." During the following days, Alexander watched as Sophia explored her future domain. She charmed the ancient housekeeper with respectful questions about household traditions, spent hours in the library examining family records, and insisted on visiting the home farm and meeting the tenants who worked the surrounding lands. Most surprising was her discovery of the old schoolroom in the East Wing, untouched since Alexander and his brother had completed their education prior to Eton. "This could be restored," she said thoughtfully, running her fingers over dusty globes and faded maps. "Not just for future children, but perhaps as a classroom for the tenants' children during winter months." Alexander frowned. "The village has a school, which is 3 miles from the outlying farms," she pointed out. "Many children can't make the journey in bad weather." He found himself studying her animated expression as she outlined her vision, the practical logistics of staffing and scheduling, the subjects that would most benefit the farming community, the way such education might improve agricultural practices in the next generation. "You've thought this through carefully," he observed. "I taught at my father's parish school," she reminded him. "Education changes lives. It's one of the most valuable gifts the privileged can offer those who depend on them." "And is that how you see the role of Duchess?" "As an opportunity to improve the lives of others." Sophia turned to him, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Is that not what we agreed? That I would bring purpose to this position, while you provided the means to achieve it?" Something in her words struck him forcefully, the realization that while he had been evaluating her suitability, she had been envisioning how to give meaning to a role that had been largely ceremonial in previous generations. "Yes," he said slowly. "That was our agreement." Later that evening, unable to sleep, Alexander found himself in the portrait gallery, staring at the painting of his parents, his father stern and commanding, his mother beautiful but distant, their poses formal and separate even within the same frame. "Your parents?" Sophia's voice came softly from behind him. He turned, surprised to find her in a dressing gown and shawl, her hair in a simple braid. The informal sight of her stirred something unexpected within him. "Yes. The 5th Duke and Duchess." She studied the portrait thoughtfully. "They look very dignified." They were the embodiment of aristocratic propriety, Alexander said, hearing the bitterness in his own voice. Were they happy? She asked. The question caught him off guard. Happy? They were successful. My father... He looked at her then, really looked at her, standing in the dim light of the portrait gallery, her expression open and questioning. In that moment, Alexander realized with startling clarity that he didn't want a marriage like his parents. The thought of living for decades in cold, proper separation from the woman before him seemed suddenly, inexplicably bleak. No, he said finally. I don't think it is. The admission hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't press further. Instead, she moved closer to examine another portrait. Is this your brother? She asked, indicating a painting of two boys, one clearly a younger version of Alexander, the other smaller but with the same distinctive Irving features. Yes. Edward. The name felt rusty on his tongue after so many years of careful avoidance. He died when he was 7. Scarlet fever. I'm sorry, she said simply. You must have missed him terribly. Alexander stared at the portrait, remembering. I wasn't permitted to. My father said grief was self-indulgent. We never spoke of Edward after the funeral. Sophia's expression reflected a compassion that should have irritated him but instead made his chest tighten uncomfortably. That must have been very lonely for you. It was a valuable lesson in emotional discipline, he replied automatically. Was it? Her voice was soft. Or was it merely a lesson in denial? Before he could respond, she continued, when my mother died, my father encouraged me to speak of her often. To remember her laughter, her kindness, even her faults. He said grief honored the love we'd shared, and that denying it would dishonor her memory. Alexander felt something shift within him, a loosening of a tightness he had carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't natural. Your father sounds like an unusual clergyman. He believes God gave us emotions for a purpose, Sophia said. Even the painful ones. They stood in silence for a time, the generations of Irvings gazing down at them with painted eyes. It's late, Alexander said finally. You should return to your room before the servants begin their morning duties. She nodded, but hesitated before leaving. Thank you for sharing something of yourself tonight, Alexander. I believe it's the first time you've done so willingly. The use of his given name startled him, as did the realization that she was right. He had revealed more to her in this quiet midnight conversation than he had intentionally shared with anyone in years. Good night, Sophia, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. After she left, Alexander remained in the gallery, troubled by the strange ache in his chest and the growing suspicion that his carefully ordered existence was being irrevocably disrupted by this quiet, perceptive woman who kept asking questions no one else dared to pose. The summer weeks passed in a blur of activity as preparations for the wedding proceeded. Alexander had proposed an October date, giving them the full 3 months of their agreement before making the union official. Sophia had acquiesced, though her practical nature recognized the enormous effort being expended for a wedding that might never take place if either of them chose to dissolve their arrangement. Yet as July turned to August, something was shifting between them, a tentative bridge forming across the formal distance Alexander had initially established. Their conversations had grown more natural, their shared interests more genuine. He had begun consulting her about estate matters, valuing her perspective on tenant issues and community needs. She had found herself studying ducal history and traditions, wanting to honor the heritage she might soon be part of. Most significant was their growing comfort in each other's presence. The stiff formality had gradually given way to something that, while not exactly relaxed, held moments of genuine connection, a shared smile over a tenant child's antics, mutual appreciation for a sunset view from the terrace, quiet evenings in the library where silence felt companionable rather than strained. Sophia's father had come to stay at Westmoreland Court, his health somewhat improved by the treatments Alexander had arranged. Watching their interaction, Sophia had been touched by Alexander's evident respect for the elderly vicar, engaging him in theological discussions and ensuring every comfort was provided without making him feel like a charity case. "Your Duke is not what I expected," her father confided one afternoon as they walked slowly through the rose garden. "Society paints him as cold and forbidding, but I see a man of principle who carries great responsibility with dignity." "He is those things," Sophia acknowledged. "But there's more beneath the surface." Her father studied her with knowing eyes. "You've grown fond of him." It wasn't a question. Sophia felt a flush warm her cheeks. "I respect him greatly." "Respect is an excellent foundation," her father said gently. "But is it enough for a lifetime?" "We understand each other," Sophia replied, unwilling to admit even to herself how her feelings had evolved from cautious evaluation to something more complex and potentially dangerous. The truth was that Alexander Irving fascinated her. Beneath his controlled exterior lay a keen intelligence, dry wit, and deeply rooted sense of duty that she had come to admire. More compelling were the glimpses of vulnerability she occasionally witnessed, moments when the mask slipped to reveal a man who had never been taught how to process emotion, who had buried grief and loneliness beneath layers of discipline and duty. Each revelation, his passionate interest in agricultural innovation, his subtle care for aging servants, his unexpected knowledge of poetry, his genuine concern when a tenant child fell ill, added dimension to her understanding of him. The Duke of Westmoreland was indeed cold and logical, but Alexander Irving was a far more complex man than society perceived. What troubled Sophia was her growing suspicion that she was developing precisely the kind of emotional attachment their arrangement had been designed to avoid. Their agreement had been clear, a pragmatic partnership based on mutual advantage and respect, not romantic affection. Alexander had been forthright about his inability to offer more, and she had accepted those terms. Yet her heart seemed increasingly unwilling to honor that contract. The turning point came unexpectedly during a violent summer storm. Thunder had woken Sophia in the night, and unable to return to sleep, she had made her way to the library in search of a book. To her surprise, she found Alexander already there, standing at the window watching the lightning illuminate the grounds. "I didn't expect anyone to be awake," she said, startled. He turned, equally surprised by her appearance. "The storm. I've always found them compelling." She moved to stand beside him at the window, watching as another flash of lightning silhouetted the ancient oaks. "They're beautiful in their way. Powerful and a bit frightening. Nature at its most honest," he agreed. "No pretense, no social niceties, just raw elemental force." Sophia glanced at him, struck by the unusual sentiment. "I wouldn't have taken you for a romantic, Your Grace." A faint smile touched his lips. "There are many things you wouldn't take me for, Sophia." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "Such as?" He was silent for a moment, watching the rain lash against the glass. "I used to dream of being a naturalist," he said finally. "Before my brother died and I became the heir. I wanted to catalogue the flora and fauna of our estates, perhaps travel to document species in other lands." "Why didn't you pursue it anyway?" she asked. "Surely a duke has freedom to follow his interests." "A duke has duties," he corrected. "Responsibilities to his family legacy, his dependents, his position. Personal interests are secondary." "But surely there's room for both," she argued. "Duty and passion need not be mutually exclusive." Alexander turned to look at her fully, his expression unusually open in the shadowed room. "That has not been my experience." "Then perhaps your experience has been unnecessarily limited," she said gently. A crash of thunder shook the window panes, momentarily distracting them. When Sophia looked back, she found Alexander studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What would you have me do differently?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Allow yourself to want things," she answered. Sophia felt a surge of tenderness so acute it was almost painful. Without thinking, she reached out to touch his face, a gesture so intimate, so far beyond the boundaries of their careful arrangement that she felt him tense beneath her fingers. "Some things are worth the risk," she whispered. For a suspended moment, she thought he might kiss her. His eyes darkened, his body leaned almost imperceptibly toward hers. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back, composing his features into their usual controlled lines. "It's late," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You should return to your room." Sophia withdrew her hand, stung by his retreat yet understanding it. "Of course. Good night, Your Grace." As she left the library, her emotions in turmoil, Sophia finally acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Alexander Irving, not with his title or his wealth, but with the complex, wounded, honorable man behind the ducal facade. And that realization terrified her, for she had promised to enter a marriage without such complications. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that behind her, Alexander remained at the window long into the night, his carefully constructed worldview crumbling as he confronted the possibility that his heart was not, after all, as frozen as he had believed. The morning after the storm brought unwelcome news. Alexander was sorting through correspondence in his study when his secretary delivered a folded note bearing his cousin Reginald's seal. "This was hand-delivered just now, Your Grace," Powell said, his expression suggesting he was well aware of the sender's unwelcome status. Alexander broke the seal, scanning the brief contents with growing irritation. "It seems my cousin has invited himself to stay," he informed Powell. "He arrives tomorrow, ostensibly to offer his congratulations on my engagement. Shall I prepare the blue suite, Your Grace?" "No," Alexander replied coolly. "The oak room in the east wing will suffice. As far from the family quarters as possible." After Powell departed, Alexander reread his cousin's presumptuous note. Reginald's sudden interest in his engagement could only mean trouble. For years, Reginald had cultivated expectations of inheriting the dukedom, making no secret of his belief that Alexander would never remarry after Elizabeth's death. The announcement of his engagement to Sophia had clearly disrupted those expectations. Alexander found himself unusually protective of Sophia at the thought of exposing her to Reginald's calculating presence. His cousin had a talent for identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them mercilessly, a trait that had made him successful in certain social circles but detestable to Alexander. More concerning was the timing. Their 3-month agreement was halfway complete, with both of them still navigating the evolving nature of their relationship. Reginald's interference could destabilize the delicate understanding developing between them. Particularly after last night. Alexander had spent hours afterward analyzing that moment in the library, Sophia's gentle touch, the unfamiliar surge of desire he had experienced, the overwhelming urge to close the distance between them. It had been decades since he'd allowed himself to want something so personal, so disconnected from duty or reason. The prospect both exhilarated and terrified him. He found Sophia in the morning room with her father, the two of them engaged in a game of chess. She looked up as he entered, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. Reverend Russell greeted him warmly, apparently oblivious to the sudden tension between his daughter and her fiancé. "I've come to inform you that we'll be having a visitor," Alexander announced. "My cousin, Lord Reginald Irving, arrives tomorrow." "How lovely," Reverend Russell said. "I look forward to meeting more of your family." Sophia's expression, however, showed understanding of the significance. "Your heir presumptive, is he not?" she asked carefully. Until recently, Alexander confirmed, their eyes meeting in silent communication. His visit is unexpected and, I suspect, not entirely motivated by goodwill. I see. Sophia's gaze was steady. Then we shall receive him with appropriate courtesy. Alexander nodded, appreciating her quick grasp of the situation. I would advise caution in your interactions with him. Reginald can be calculating. I'm familiar with the type, she replied with surprising dryness. My cousin Isabella's husband demonstrated similar traits when pursuing her modest fortune. Despite his concern, Alexander found himself nearly smiling at her composure. Then I trust you'll manage admirably. Reginald arrived the following afternoon in a flamboyant carriage drawn by matched grey horses, an extravagant display that Alexander knew was financed primarily through gambling and the exploitation of his own modest inheritance. "Cousin!" Reginald exclaimed as he entered the great hall, arms spread wide in theatrical welcome. "How splendid to see you looking so well. Marriage clearly agrees with you, even in anticipation." "We are not yet married, as you well know," Alexander replied coolly. "What brings you to Westmoreland Court, Reginald?" "Your note mentioned congratulations, but you could have conveyed those in writing." "So cold, Alex, so cold," Reginald chided, using the childhood nickname Alexander had always detested. "Can't a man wish to meet his future cousin-in-law in person? I've heard such intriguing reports about your Miss Russell." Something in his tone made Alexander's jaw tighten. "Miss Russell is currently walking with her father. You'll meet them at dinner." "A vicar's daughter," Reginald mused, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "How unexpected for a man of your position. One might almost think there were unusual circumstances necessitating such a match." Alexander recognized the implication immediately. "If you're suggesting impropriety, I advise you to guard your tongue carefully in my house." Reginald raised his hands in mock surrender. "I suggest nothing, cousin. Merely expressing surprise at your choice. After all, when one has waited 5 years to remarry, one would expect a more conventional selection." "My choice of bride is not your concern," Alexander said coldly. "Powell will show you to your room. We dine at 7. As his cousin followed the secretary upstairs, Alexander remained in the hall, his hands clenched at his sides. Reginald's insinuations confirmed his suspicions. His cousin was here to assess Sophia for weaknesses, perhaps even to attempt to disrupt their engagement. The thought stirred a protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. At dinner, Alexander watched with growing admiration as Sophia handled Reginald's subtle probing with remarkable poise. When questioned about her modest upbringing, she spoke with quiet dignity about her father's parish work. When Reginald made thinly veiled references to fortune hunters, she redirected the conversation to agricultural improvements with such natural ease that even Alexander's practiced eye could detect no offense taken. "Tell me, Miss Russell," Reginald said as the dessert course was served, "how do you find the prospect of becoming a duchess? It must be quite overwhelming for someone of your background." "Indeed, the responsibilities are considerable," Sophia replied evenly. "Fortunately, His Grace has been most thorough in acquainting me with what will be expected." "So practical," Reginald observed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And yet one wonders what attracted my cousin to such practicality. He's never struck me as a romantic man." "Perhaps because His Grace values substance over sentiment," she suggested, meeting Alexander's gaze briefly across the table. "A quality I greatly respect." Alexander felt an unexpected warmth at her defense. "Miss Russell and I share compatible views on many matters," he added, "including the importance of responsible stewardship of the dukedom." Reginald's smile tightened. "How fortunate." though I've always believed that great houses like ours benefit from the introduction of fresh blood from time to time. New perspectives, different values. It keeps the line vigorous. If you're referring to Miss Russell's lack of aristocratic heritage, I consider it an advantage rather than a liability, Alexander said firmly. Her practical experience and Alexander felt cold fury sweep through him. The insinuation was clear, that Sophia was with child, that their engagement was a forced solution to a scandal rather than a choice. It was precisely the sort of malicious gossip that could destroy a woman's reputation, regardless of its truth. "This is Reginald's doing," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "He must have sent this before even arriving here." "It's absurd," Sophia said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Anyone who knows me would never believe such a thing." "London society doesn't know you," Alexander replied grimly. "They'll believe whatever provides the most entertaining gossip." Reverend Russell entered the room then, his expression troubled. "I've just had a most disturbing conversation with Lord Reginald in the garden." He expressed concern about Sophia's reputation, mentioning rumours in London that he felt duty-bound to bring to my attention. "Did he indeed?" Alexander's voice was ice. "How conscientious of him, considering he himself planted those rumours." "Alexander," Sophia began, but he was already striding toward the door. "Please excuse me," he said with rigid formality. "I need to have a word with my cousin." Alexander found Reginald in the billiards room, practicing shots with casual unconcern. Without preamble, Alexander slapped the newspaper down on the table, disrupting his cousin's play. "Explain this," he demanded. Reginald glanced at the item with feigned surprise. "Unfortunate gossip. Society can be so cruel to newcomers." "Gossip you orchestrated," Alexander said flatly. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize your hand in this?" "Come now, cousin." Reginald straightened, abandoning his pretense of innocence. "You can hardly blame me for wondering what prompted this sudden engagement to a nobody. A man in your position, with your history of avoiding entanglements, it's natural to question what hold this woman has over you." "Miss Russell has no hold over me," Alexander replied coldly. "I chose her for qualities you wouldn't recognize: integrity, intelligence, genuine concern for others." Reginald laughed. "How touching! And does she return your regard? Or is she merely accepting a practical arrangement that elevates her far beyond her rightful place?" The question struck uncomfortably close to the truth of their initial agreement. "Our understanding is none of your concern." "Isn't it?" "As your heir, the future of this dukedom has been my concern for 5 years," Reginald countered, his affable mask dropping to reveal naked ambition. "I've waited while you buried yourself in grief and duty. I've prepared to assume responsibilities that you showed no interest in perpetuating. And now, just as society was beginning to accept the inevitability of my succession, you produced this convenient engagement." "You've never been fit to inherit Westmoreland," Alexander said with cold precision. "Your gambling, your debts, your complete disregard for anyone but yourself, these are the reasons I sought to marry again, not because of any particular attachment to Miss Russell." The moment the words left his mouth, Alexander realized his tactical error. Reginald's expression shifted from anger to calculating triumph. "I see," his cousin said softly. "So it is a marriage of convenience after all. How interesting. I wonder if Miss Russell understands the true nature of your arrangement? Or does she harbor romantic illusions about having melted the frozen Duke's heart?" Alexander felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "Whatever our arrangement, it is private between us." "Perhaps," Reginald conceded. "But society does love to speculate. Particularly when the bride discovers she's been acquired like a broodmare rather than chosen with affection. you will leave Westmoreland Court immediately," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. "If you breathe a word of this conversation to Miss Russell or anyone else, I will ensure that every gambling hell in London knows the exact state of your finances and refuses you credit. You will be ruined within a fortnight." Reginald's smug expression faltered. "You wouldn't dare. I'm family. Try me." Alexander held his gaze without blinking. "You have 1 hour to depart." After Reginald stormed out, Alexander remained in the billiards room, his anger gradually giving way to unease. His cousin's parting shot had hit its mark. What would Sophia think if she knew he had just confirmed their engagement was indeed a matter of convenience rather than affection? The truth was more complicated than either version. What had begun as a pragmatic arrangement had evolved into something Alexander couldn't easily define. His feelings for Sophia had grown beyond respect and admiration into territory he had deliberately avoided for decades. Yet he had just denied any particular attachment to her in the most callous terms possible. Alexander closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that he had been lying, not to Reginald, but to himself. The prospect of losing Sophia troubled him far more deeply than concerns about succession or social appearances. Somewhere in the past weeks, she had become essential to him not as a solution to a problem, but as herself, her quiet strength, her gentle wisdom, her ability to see beyond his defenses to the man he might have been under different circumstances. The question now was whether he had the courage to admit it, not just to her, but to himself. Sophia stood at her bedroom window, watching Reginald's carriage depart with unseemly haste. Alexander had not explained the sudden eviction, saying only that his cousin had overstayed his welcome. But the tension in his jaw and the careful distance he maintained suggested that whatever had transpired between them had left him deeply troubled. Her own emotions were in turmoil. The vicious gossip in the newspaper had been shocking enough, but Alexander's reaction, the cold, controlled fury with which he had confronted his cousin, had revealed aspects of his character she had only glimpsed before. His instinct to protect her reputation spoke to a concern that went beyond their practical arrangement. Or did it? Perhaps he was merely protecting the dignity of his future duchess, maintaining appearances as their agreement stipulated. Sophia pressed her palm against the cool glass, suddenly unsure of everything. The past weeks had changed her understanding of Alexander Irving, revealing depths of character, hidden passions, and a capacity for connection he himself seemed unaware of possessing. She had watched him gradually lower his defenses, allowing her glimpses of the man behind the ducal mask. In those unguarded moments, Sophia had begun to hope that perhaps their arrangement might evolve into something more meaningful than either had initially envisioned. The night of the storm had seemed a turning point. His confession of wanting things he believed himself incapable of wanting had stirred something profound within her. Yet since Reginald's arrival, Alexander had retreated behind his walls again, his manner formal and distant. Whatever progress they had made seemed suddenly precarious. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was her father, his kind face concerned. "Are you well, my dear? That newspaper article was most distressing." "I'm fine, father," she assured him, though her smile felt forced. "Lord Reginald has departed, and the gossip will soon be forgotten." Reverend Russell studied her with the perceptiveness that had always made him an effective pastor. "It's not the gossip that troubles you, is it?" "It's the Duke." Sophia sighed, unable to dissemble with the man who knew her best. "I'm no longer certain I understand what exists between us. What began as a clear arrangement has become complicated." "Because you developed genuine feelings for him," her father observed gently. "Yes," she admitted, the confession both relieving and frightening. "Though I promised myself I wouldn't. It wasn't part of our agreement." "The heart rarely honors such practical arrangements," he said with a small smile. "And what of the Duke's feelings? Has he given you reason to believe he might return your regard? Sophia thought of their conversations, the gradual softening of his manner, the unguarded moments when something warm and real had seemed to pass between them. Sometimes I believe he might. Other times, I think he's merely becoming more comfortable with our arrangement. Her father patted her hand. Then perhaps it's time for honest conversation. Then perhaps it's time we discussed whether our arrangement has evolved in ways neither of us anticipated. Sophia leaned forward, willing him to meet her eyes. Before Reginald's arrival, I believed we were building something beyond our original understanding. Something meaningful. Alexander's expression tightened. Meaningful in what sense? In an emotional sense, she said simply. I've come to care for you, Alexander. Not for your title or position, but for the man I've come to know, thoughtful, honorable, capable of far more feeling than you allow yourself to acknowledge. The silence that followed her confession seemed endless. Alexander's face remained impassive, though she thought she detected a flicker of something, pain, fear, in his eyes. I see, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. And you believe I've developed similar sentiments? The deliberate distance in his tone made her heart sink, but Sophia pressed on. I believed it possible. There have been moments when you've shown me the man behind your ducal mask, the man who loves his land, who cares deeply for his dependents, who remembers poetry and watches storms with something like wonder. Alexander rose abruptly, moving to the window with his back to her. I warned you from the beginning that I am not capable of the kind of emotional connection you describe. If I've given you reason to believe otherwise, it was unintentional. His words struck like physical blows, yet Sophia sensed the rigid control behind them, the same defensive withdrawal she had witnessed whenever he felt vulnerable. I don't believe you, she said quietly. He turned, his expression hardening. I beg your pardon. I don't believe you're incapable of emotional connection, Sophia clarified, rising to face him. I believe you're afraid of it. There's a difference. You presume to know my mind better than I do myself. His tone was dangerously calm. I know what I've observed, she replied steadily. A man who retreats behind coldness whenever he feels exposed. Who uses logic and duty to shield himself from the risk of attachment. Who denies his own capacity for feeling because he's been taught that emotions are weaknesses rather than strengths. Alexander's jaw tightened. A convenient analysis. Have you considered that your own wishful thinking might be coloring your observations? That perhaps you've interpreted common courtesy as something more significant because it suits your romantic nature. The deliberate cruelty of his words made Sophia flinch, but she recognized the defensive tactic for what it was, an attempt to push her away before she could come any closer. Yes, she admitted softly. I've considered that possibility. Which is why I'm asking for honesty now, rather than proceeding with a marriage founded on misunderstanding. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable showed in his expression, a glimpse of the conflict raging beneath his controlled exterior. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool, impersonal mask of the Duke of Westmoreland. Very well, he said with detached formality. Honesty, then. Our arrangement is precisely as we originally agreed, a marriage of convenience that would benefit us both practically. I have grown to respect your intelligence and character, which suggests we could maintain a harmonious household. But if you require romantic attachment or deeper emotional connection, I must inform you that I cannot provide it. Each word was perfectly articulated, utterly reasonable, and completely at odds with the man she had come to know over the past weeks. Sophia felt a deep sadness settle within her, not just for herself, but for him, trapped within the prison of his own making, denying himself the very connections that might heal his wounded heart. Thank you for your candor, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the ache in her chest. In that case, I believe we should dissolve our engagement. I cannot enter a marriage knowing it will never fulfill my deepest needs, and you should not be bound to a woman who wants more than you can give." Alexander's face remained impassive, though she thought she detected a flicker of something like panic in his eyes. "If that is your wish." "It isn't my wish," Sophia replied with quiet dignity. "It's my recognition of reality, yours and mine." She moved toward the door, then paused. "My father and I will make arrangements to depart tomorrow. I'll have your ring returned to you before we leave." "The settlement we discussed," he began. "Won't be necessary," she interrupted gently. "I entered our agreement in good faith and dissolve it the same way. I require no compensation for a decision made with open eyes." With that, she left the study, maintaining her composure until she reached her room. Only then did she allow the tears to fall, not just for the future she was relinquishing, but for the man who could not bring himself to reach for happiness when it stood before him. Alexander remained motionless long after Sophia left, staring at the closed door as though it might somehow reopen and restore what he had just deliberately destroyed. The silence of the study pressed in around him, broken only by the steady tick of the clock marking the passage of time, time that was carrying Sophia further away from him with each moment. What had he done? He moved to his desk, mechanically pouring brandy with a hand that was not entirely steady. The familiar burn of the spirit did nothing to ease the hollow ache in his chest, an emptiness more profound than anything he had experienced since those first dark days after Elizabeth's death. Elizabeth! For 5 years he had used her memory as a shield, her death as proof that emotional attachment led only to pain. Yet the truth, which he had never fully admitted even to himself, was that he had felt only duty toward his first wife, respect, consideration, responsibility, but never the kind of soul-deep connection that Sophia's absence now revealed was possible. In the silence of his study, Alexander finally confronted the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. He had fallen in love with Sophia Russell. Not with the convenient solution to his succession problem, not with the respectable vicar's daughter who would make a suitable duchess, but with the woman herself, her intelligence, her compassion, her quiet strength, her ability to see him as he truly was and accept him despite his flaws. And in his fear of that love, in his terror of the vulnerability it created, he had rejected her with deliberate cruelty, driving her away rather than risking the pain her loss might someday cause. The irony was unbearable. In trying to protect himself from future pain, he had created precisely the suffering he sought to avoid. Alexander paced the room, his mind racing. He could go to her now, confess the truth, beg her forgiveness. But what right had he to ask her to reconsider? He had hurt her deliberately, using her own feelings against her. She deserved better than his confused, belated recognition of emotions he had spent a lifetime denying. Besides, what could he offer that she hadn't already rejected? A marriage of convenience would never satisfy her, and he wasn't certain he knew how to be the kind of husband she deserved, one capable of the emotional openness she valued. As night fell, Alexander remained in his study, tormented by the knowledge that Sophia would depart in the morning, taking with her his unexpected chance at a life beyond duty and reason, a life that might have included genuine happiness. Sleep eluded him. Near dawn, desperate for air, he left the house and walked to the stables, seeking the simple comfort of his horse's uncomplicated companionship. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, promising another perfect late summer day. The thought that Sophia would not be there to share it with him made the beauty seem like a mockery. As he approached the stable yard, Alexander was surprised to see a figure already there, Reverend Russell, leaning heavily on his walking stick as he gazed across the home paddock where several of Alexander's prized horses grazed in the early light. "Your Grace," the elderly man greeted him with mild surprise. "You're abroad early." "As are you," Alexander replied, noting the vicar's pallor with concern. "Should you be walking unaccompanied? Your health, is sufficient for a short morning constitutional," Reverend Russell finished with a small smile. "The doctor you engaged has done wonders for my condition, though I fear time will have its way eventually." Alexander joined him at the fence, uncomfortable yet unwilling to leave. "You're departing today, I understand." "Yes." "Sophia feels it best." The vicar's gentle eye studied him with disconcerting perception. Alexander felt something shift within him, a crumbling of the walls he had built around his heart, a recognition of the truth he could no longer deny. "I love her," he said, the words strange yet perfectly natural on his lips. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, because loving her makes me vulnerable in ways I've spent my life avoiding." "Yes," Reverend Russell agreed simply. "Love always makes us vulnerable. It's the price of its transformative power. And if she no longer wishes to accept what I've so recently discovered I can offer—" The vicar smiled gently. "Then you will have the dignity of having been honest with yourself and with her? But I wouldn't underestimate my daughter's capacity for forgiveness, particularly where her heart is concerned." Alexander straightened, a new resolve forming within him. "Thank you, Reverend Russell. Your wisdom has been illuminating." "I'm merely doing what fathers have done since time immemorial," the older man replied with a twinkle in his eye. "Helping clear the path to my daughter's happiness. Though in your case, Your Grace, the obstacles have been largely of your own creation." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Alexander felt himself smile, a genuine expression of both rueful acknowledgement and newfound hope. "Then it's time I removed them, don't you think?" Sophia folded the last of her gowns into her trunk, her movements mechanical as she prepared for their departure. She had barely slept, her mind replaying yesterday's painful conversation with Alexander. The cool detachment with which he had confirmed his inability to offer emotional connection had shattered her hopes more effectively than anger or cruelty might have done. Yet beneath her heartache lay a curious peace. She had been honest about her feelings and her needs. She had recognized the impossibility of finding happiness in a marriage without love. However painful now, her decision to end their engagement was the right one for both of them. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting her maid, she called, "Come in," without turning from her packing. "Sophia." She froze at the sound of Alexander's voice, then slowly turned to find him standing just inside her doorway. He looked as though he hadn't slept either, his customary immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, his eyes shadowed but strangely alive with an intensity she had never seen before. "Your Grace," she acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. "I was just completing my packing. We'll be gone within the hour. Please don't go." The words seemed torn from him, raw and unplanned. Sophia stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "I don't understand." Alexander stepped further into the room, his usual composed demeanor nowhere in evidence. "I lied to you yesterday. About everything." "You lied," she repeated, confusion mingling with a treacherous flicker of hope. "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically vulnerable it caught her breath. "When you asked if I had developed feelings for you, I denied it. Not because it was untrue, but because I was afraid to admit the truth, to you, to myself." Sophia remained motionless, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. "And what is the truth?" Alexander moved closer, close enough that she could see the play of emotions across his face: fear, hope, determination. "The truth is that I love you, Sophia Russell," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "I love your intelligence, your kindness, your quiet strength. I love the way you see beyond appearances to the heart of things. I love that you've made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and what I'm capable of feeling." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but she held them back, needing to understand. "Then why did you deny it when I asked?" Why push me away with such deliberate coldness? Because I've spent my entire life believing that emotional attachment is a weakness, that caring deeply for someone means giving them the power to destroy you when they're gone. His voice caught. I watched my mother broken by grief, my father hardened by its suppression. I built my life around the conviction that duty and reason were safer, more reliable foundations than love. And now? Sophia whispered. Now I understand that in trying to protect myself from pain, I've denied myself the possibility of joy. Alexander took her hands in his touch gentle yet somehow desperate. I've denied myself you. A tear escaped, trailing down Sophia's cheek. How can I trust this sudden revelation? Yesterday you couldn't offer what I needed. Today you declare love. What changed? Not my feelings, he said quietly. Only my courage to acknowledge them. I've been falling in love with you since that first dance, when you spoke to me with such forthright honesty. Every conversation, every shared experience since then has only deepened what I tried desperately to deny. Sophia searched his face, looking for any sign of calculation or pretense. She found only naked vulnerability, the aristocratic mask completely abandoned, leaving only the man before her, offering his heart with trembling hands. I can't promise I'll be perfect at this, Alexander continued when she remained silent. I've spent too long suppressing emotion to transform overnight. But I can promise to try to be honest about my feelings, to allow myself to love you openly, to build a marriage based on more than duty or convenience. Sophia felt her resolve weakening, hope rising within her despite her attempt to guard against further pain. And if I believe you? If I stay? Then we'll proceed with our wedding as planned, he said. But not as a business arrangement between convenient partners. As a union between two people who have chosen each other, who want to build something meaningful together. His hands tightened around hers. I don't deserve a second chance, Sophia. Not after how I hurt you yesterday. But if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, to trust that what I feel for you is real, I swear I will spend every day proving worthy of that trust. Sophia closed her eyes, her heart and mind in turmoil. Everything she had wanted, everything she had believed impossible, was being offered to her now. Yet the memory of yesterday's rejection remained raw, a warning against trusting too easily. I need to know, she said finally, opening her eyes to meet his gaze directly. Was anything real before this moment? Or have you simply realized you might lose the convenient solution to your succession problem? A shadow of pain crossed his face at her question, but he didn't flinch from it. Everything was real, he said quietly. Every conversation, every shared interest, every moment of connection, all of it was real. What wasn't real was my insistence that those moments meant nothing beyond practical compatibility. I lied to myself long before I lied to you. The simple honesty of his answer reached her as no elaborate declaration could have done. This was Alexander at his most vulnerable, not the Duke of Westmoreland with his perfect control, but a man acknowledging his fears and limitations while offering his heart despite them. I love you, she whispered, the words both an admission and a surrender. Despite my best efforts not to, despite knowing it might lead to pain. I love you, Alexander. The transformation of his expression was like watching dawn break across a winter landscape, disbelief giving way to wonder, wonder to a joy so pure it seemed to illuminate him from within. Before she could say more, he had drawn her into his arms, his embrace both gentle and fiercely protective. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. But I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway. Sophia leaned back to look up at him, her heart too full for words. Instead, she raised herself on tiptoes, placing a gentle hand against his cheek. The kiss that followed was nothing like she had imagined their first might be. There was no hesitation, no careful restraint, only the desperate tenderness of two people who had nearly lost what they had only just discovered. Alexander's arms tightened around her, drawing her closer as though afraid she might still disappear. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you'll stay?" "That our engagement stands." "Yes," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the tears of joy threatening to overwhelm her.